on the polls, right? We'll have everybody vote on the polls. It'll take like a minute to vote on the polls because I see that not a lot of people have voted on the scheduling polls for OMOP and Spark. So either I'm not doing a good job of advertising them. So let's everybody take a minute right off the top and do that. Then we had some spec edits, spec updates. I don't think we have to have a long conversation about spec updates, but if we have any quick guidance we might want to get from the group on any of those changes. And then I didn't have a lot. Maybe we can get some updates about testing. And there's this one discussion that we've been kicking down the road a couple of times that's about view definition intents and multiples, view definition targeting multiple resources, or I think the testing infrastructure and just where we're at with testing as well. That might be a good place. So any other agenda items right off the top from anybody? Okay. So let me grab the 2 poll questions or 2 poll links here. I'm gonna put them in the chat. So everybody take a minute and go and vote. All right. So everybody do that while somebody else is talking, I guess. So on the spec updates, Ryan, I see you implemented some of the changes we talked about last time, the processing model. So I think there's a question on, does that sound like that doesn't feel like a good fit? At least that title.
Yeah, I think that, if there's suggestions for other titles, I didn't love that title, but wasn't quite sure where to put that. So if there's suggestions or ideas of where that should live, I think it'd be totally open to alternatives, kind of view that as a placeholder for now. But yeah, and otherwise, there's still like ongoing cleanup and that sort of thing that needs to happen throughout things. But I didn't have but unless, people want to flag or disagree with the way it's structured in any way, or are looking for significant change. If there's significant structural changes people are interested in, then we can talk about those today. Otherwise, we can probably continue to work through these incrementally. And if there's suggestions for rename what we should name the implementer guidance or how we should otherwwise structure it, I'd be happy to hear perspectives on that as well. But yeah, I think that's I didn't have any other specific topics in that space.
Okay, sounds good. So this can be more of an advertisement to the group. Take a look at the spec. It's on the master build, right? I'll put it in the chat. And I think it's just open to everyone to take a look at, think of what might need to be changed, any tweaks. There was a suggestion from Nikolai that someone put the content onto like a Google Doc for editing convenience. Do we still think that's something that's valuable for us to do?
Yeah. To be honest with you, I kind of skipped past that step and just I felt like in our previous discussions we were kind of close-ish, so it seemed like it was easier to kind of create just a first pass of that, and that is at least a step in the right direction. And then I hadn't created a doc. If they're still interested in doing so, we can, but I think that it's probably narrowed down to a relatively small number of open questions. I like the page, or whether we should fold in the purpose page and the overview. I don't have strong opinions on any of that. So, but maybe it's just a discussion. It's not obvious to me that we need to a doc or outline of that, unless people really want to reorganize things.
Yeah, I think it's more about the content, content edits. But I'm almost of the mind that if anybody wants to work on the spec, they can just pull it and edit it in Markdown, right? If it's just about pure content, we don't need sort of visual editing, unless there's a strong reason, because then we'll have 2 versions to synchronize and coordinate. So I think we'll just hold off on that. I did put the glossary that I made into a spreadsheet just for convenience. So I'll post a link to that so that people can take a look at that, because it's already in a Google Sheet. Go ahead and make PRs against the spec, post ideas on Zulip, contact Ryan, me, for any kind of coordination necessary. So that's it for the spec. Next up, testing.
Sorry, just a quick note before we go to the next topic.
Yep.
So the dates that are on the poll, they are supposed to be Tuesdays, right?
Yes. Did I mess up?
I think they are off by 1 day, I think, if I understand correctly. So today is the 5th, right? So next one, 12th.
Did I look at the wrong date? I might have. It is the 12th. All right. Sorry. Hopefully nobody else.
Yeah, I assume people voted for Tuesday because you say in the thing that this is our usual hour.
Yeah.
So
that's what I meant. I'll just make a note in each one of those threads about that. Switching over to testing. Any updates on test infrastructure, test coverage from you, Igor?
Yeah, thank you. So coverage-wise, I believe we approached. Basically, from my perspective, the coverage is done. So we covered every feature we had on the list, and right now I think we would like to have another pair or two of eyes to go through them and see if anything is missed, because from my perspective we're all done. Well, if I didn't miss something painfully obvious. So here's that. And yeah, that's pretty much all.
Great. Sounds like good progress, certainly. Anything else on John?
Yeah, really glad to see that we've got it all green, and from our perspective on Pathling, we've got almost all the tests green, and I think the ones that are remaining are because of issues on our side rather than issues with the spec or anything like that. Interested to know if anybody else has had a go at running the tests against their implementation, like maybe Ryan, Bashir, just because that's probably the next step if we can get more socialize the tests with more people, more implementations.
Great, excellent.
Yeah, I meant to have an update by today, but unfortunately I haven't gone through them yet. But very soon I'll try to integrate those tests in, against our implementation. And thanks everyone, John, Igor, and others. I was following, the updates to the test. So I think those are actually very good and cover most of the cases. So yeah, we'll hopefully next week. Well, I'm not sure if next week I will be here, but soon I can maybe report updates on our side as well.
Great, that's terrific. Ryan, from your side, any updates?
No, not on the test. I'm not able to spend a lot of time on the implementation right now or space, so I'll defer to Bashir from the Google perspective on that.
Great. Well, it seems like even over a couple of weeks, some rapid progress with the testing infrastructure and coverage. So that's really great to see. Yeah, excellent. And I think it's the next step is really just to, like John said, socialize it over to more implementers or people starting to implement. So, and then getting that matrix, fill in the matrix. So that's exciting. Great. Anything else on testing, test coverage, that moving forward? No? All right. Yeah, the last item was about view definition intent and, potentially multiple resources. But I don't know if we want to have a pre-discussion and just get out some thoughts into the group. It's been a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months even since we've talked about it. So I don't know if any of you have given it a little more thought through any of your positions, maybe for the broader audience here, because we know we have, Ryan, maybe you would take a pass just at summarizing or talking over what this is about broadly.
Yeah, so I think that I'll talk about the motivation and then kind of like give some context on the discussion there. But I think that the background motivation is like over time we've found like these view definitions are useful for multiple different things. They'd be useful for, I think the original sort of use case that we had in mind is like you'd be able to create a view definition, you create a nice flat purely tabular table of scalar values, and it's easy to use for databases. But I think Graham has and probably others have found other use cases where it's useful to use a view definition that might include some sort of additional nested structure or repeated fields and that sort of thing. And so as a result, it'd be nice to be able to kind of label a view definition with what's its intended use case is. And then that way tooling could do some additional validation to make sure it matches that use case. So for instance, if the intent was, a complete tabular view of scalar values, then we might label it with some sort of enumeration that's its intent. And therefore, if that view definition does not meet certain properties, like every single field is a scalar value, then it would be considered invalid by some future validation tooling there. So I think that's like the kind of the motivation beyond that is like to basically, when you get a view definition and you need to should be able to look at it and immediately tell like, hey, this can be exported as a CSV because it meets certain properties, whereas this one might be a more complicated structure. And so I think that's kind of the motivation there. There were some like earlier discussions like in the like on the Zulip chat, I think that went back a while on what the best way to model that is. So originally, I had been thinking down the path of this it could be feels along the lines of like an enumerated value that would be on the resource itself. So basically an intent, maybe you have a tabular intent, or maybe you have a structured output and that sort of thing. I think it was also brought at the same time was brought up, I think, I don't know if I think Josh suggested it. It doesn't look like he's here today. we could use like profiles for like a similar case so basically by having a profile of the view definition that is associated with an intent for something that could be tabular or could fit some of these other properties. I think that's an appealing idea because you can add new profiles for new intents as they emerge with different constraints and different checks and that sort of thing. And so even though there's not really like a direct sort of flag or an enum you might see on the view definition itself, I mean, if we declare, hey, it implements this profile or satisfies this profile for this intent, and then it would meet those properties. So I think that's kind of where things are right now. If we want, well, one is like, when should we introduce intent? I think that my personal perspective is like maybe that can be deferred until after the initial release, since it's like profiles that would extend it. But I think that's a reasonable discussion. And then like maybe what intents there would be. And, if folks are interested in like building any profiles as part of this, I think I don't think it's super hard, but yes, it's like, it does touch on like some sort of additional cases of like creating profiles of a logical model in FHIR is a little bit esoteric. So we'll need to dig into that a little more. Anyway, so that's kind of the summary. I'll pause there for thoughts or what we'd like to jump into today. John.
Yeah, there's a couple of sort of concepts running through my mind that are maybe not exactly the same thing. So what you're talking about is more like, I think, view runner capabilities potentially, but there's also things like that, which I thought you were talking about with intent, was sort of like, is this intended to be head, or is this like just a sort of ephemeral view? Is this sort of identifiable via a URI and published in like an IG, or am I just giving this to a Python library to run right now? So, and then when you were talking about the capabilities side of things, I was, that's really good. Yeah, so, maybe it's like just a flat format like CSV. Maybe it's sort of a nested schema like Spark. Maybe it's, but I'm just wondering whether these things are separate. Like one is more sort of terminology, is the other one like optionality in terms of things in the spec, like scope of the FHIR pass subset, or optional features like terminology. But are we talking about two separate things here, like capabilities and sort of the profile of the resource itself, like additional metadata and requirements to make it shareable, for example?
Yeah, I mean, they could be distinct spaces. That said, if like we do like adopt like a profiling approach, I mean, profiles could be used for both, and maybe it's and maybe we kind of leave. And the other nice thing is that would be the profiles, of course, could be externally created. So you have some specialized need to be created that. So, and maybe it's just a question of like embracing profiling for this. And maybe we have like one like simple, I mean, just if there's like a really common profile use case, like, create a something that could be stored as a CSV or like something purely tabular, we include that in the core spec. But for folks that need something more specialized, they can create their own profiles, which could be a combination of capabilities and intentions there, kind of like, I guess in the spirit of profiles.
Yeah, what John said just resonates with me, because it seems like, we're trying to essentially document different, just really different, areas of logic, right? Either, so view runner capabilities, like what is the output format? And now I'm recalling all these discussions we had previously, like, is this, and if, are you tagging this as an ephemeral sort of, certain parts of the spec are used or not used? It just seems like it's kind of a real mix, right? A real mix of intentions here. Some are trying to communicate to a third-party system, some are trying to communicate to maybe a view runner, some are almost tags, some kind of metadata on the resource on the view definition itself. I'm wondering, when we're talking about profiles, if do we have the attributes necessary, right? Sort of in the base view definition.
Yeah, and so,
what I'm getting at? Like, we don't want to use a profile to add something that's not necessarily there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we probably want to avoid like extension models as much as we can. At the same time, there is precedent for, if we have an approach of simply declaring on the view definition which profiles it satisfies you, just like you can like on an arbitrary. I mean, this isn't technically a resource, but it's much like a FHIR resource where you can declare on the resource itself, like here's the profiles it satisfies, and then and by declaring that has like certain semantics that are defined by that profile, and Josh tells me that there is I can't remember exactly where, but there is precedent for that sort of thing by virtue of a resource declaring compatibility with a profile. It attaches additional semantics to that resource that aren't necessarily like directly computable, but they would be interpreted by whoever's checking that profile at a validation step. So I do feel like profiles are sort of a good mechanism to this. Like my only concerns in this space are really, it's like since we're logical models rather than resources, we tend to poke at some less well-tested edge cases in the FHIR tooling. But if we come across issues there, then we can log bugs or fix them. Wouldn't be the first time.
Yeah, I'm like thinking about like from a really simple case, would something like meta tag, where we have a kind of socially defined set of tags. So like it's hard to, I think our cases are not clear and distinct enough, at least in my mind, to say like, okay, here's an enumerated set of them. Right, at this point. Maybe someone else might disagree with that, but something like a tag, and tag list, and then let the implementations figure out what they need, and then move to something more heavyweight like profiling. So that
well, I mean, in practice, profiles could be very much like that. I mean, so like, because like a profile could contain like almost nothing if you wanted to. It just has here's my Spark runner profile for here's the things, everything a view definition needs to be reusable in Spark, and we could have maybe to start out with, it's just like almost an empty profile that's used kind of as effectively it's like a tag, and then if we need to add additional constraints or checks or that sort of thing within the profile itself, we can, like maybe we require that it has like an ID set or something like that, and so I think that a profile can play much the role as a tag, and I think there's some precedent in that line. So I think profile seems like a nice general tool. You're right, it's more heavyweight than like some sort of meta tag. I mean, we could, but at the same time, it's a lot more powerful and generalizable, and can be, and anyone should be able to create. If I have like my special, Ryan's special view definition use case, I could create my own profile. It could live in my own repository, and it would work in this mechanism.
Bashir, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, I could see a use case where people want to create like extensions that have their own semantics. Like if you have a definition and I need to attach some sort of like, I don't know, source control metadata to it or something like that. I mean, I could see an extension model for that in the same spirit of that, but that's super speculative. I mean, I think the main role of profiles would be, it would just, I think like the key example I could see is like, if I have like a quote unquote shareable view definition, that shareable view definition might require some sort of identifier. It might require a concrete name. It might require a specific FHIR version that it's associated with. And all those things are very easily expressed in profiles. And so I think profiles make sense for like that sort of code. So I think extending the view definitions in profiles may be an unusual case, but I think like adding constraints in terms of profiles would be something that I'd expect to see. And I think it makes a great deal of sense. And I think profiles are the right mechanism for that.
Yeah, we can't preclude extension for anything in FHIR. I mean, anyone can pretty much extend anything. I guess FHIR just provides a semi-controlled way of doing so. And there's also rules around it, like you can't modify the core semantics of it unless you use modifier extensions and that sort of stuff. But yeah, someone could create like some sort of proprietary view runner and add a whole bunch of other extensions to the thing, which no one else would understand, and could maybe enable some proprietary behavior. I don't think we can preclude that sort of thing. But I just wanted to ask Ryan, like if he had an idea of what one of these profiles might look like. So you were talking about this sort of flat or nested structure. Is that the first one you had in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and in that case, and I wish Josh was here because he knows this better than I do. I mean, in that case, like the profile could be almost empty and just basically be a tag, just if it implements the flat or nested profile, we require that, or the flat profile, it requires everything's flat. There's not really a way to check that in the profile definition itself, but there are existing profiles that add requirements to resources that can't be checked in the profile and are just kind of like, so it is more like a tagging mechanism. So in that case, like a profile may seem like overkill because it is essentially a tag there. But the reason I like profiles sort of in general is like the sort of must be flat thing. If you want to go with something like, let's say we want to declare a view definition as shareable. I mean, in that case, the profile could, just using off-the-shelf profiling mechanism, we can make make the URL required and make the name required and make the status code required. Actually, I guess that is already required, but require that experimental set to false, for example, and that sort of thing. Like basically add constraints to the fields in terms of the profile. So I think like for that case, it's like profile seems like absolutely the right tool for the job. And since it seems like we'd use it for that case as well, using it for additional things to attach additional semantics to those, even if it's not like strictly enforced by the profiling tooling, it's like one mechanism for both. And again, it was Josh's suggestion to do that. So I'm trying to give him credit, not blame him, but I think it's a good idea. I agree with Josh's suggestion there.
Right, because it's almost like investing in the future a little bit, right? If because in some cases the profile will be able to create enforceable constraints, right? There are some cases, like you're saying, that it's really a tag, right? It's not really, there's no enforceable constraint. I expect there are probably more that we haven't thought of, but investing in that, because we do know that enforceable constraints on the profile will become, we can pretty strongly assume that there'll be important cases where that exists. So if we're going to work on this anyway, might as well just use one mechanism rather than kind of two mechanisms, but use the mechanism that can satisfy the case. And people should be comfortable with profiling in general, so it's not like something super far out. Yeah, I could get behind, certainly. Great. Yeah, I think we'll reopen this conversation, and then I think there's definitely going to be a bigger conversation around, view definitions targeting multiple resource. I think we just scratched the surface on that conversation the last time around. Thinking through some of our use cases, when we close off the scope, right? Do we think this is V1 scope, or do we not think this is V1 scope? So I think that's a question. If you guys have an opinion today, feel free to share it.
My opinion is that nothing is V1 scope except what we've got, but I think it's a really good idea. I think having the ability to sort of express different intents is a good thing. And I'm thinking maybe there could be some sort of basic, perhaps use case based intents in the spec, but I'm wondering if this could also be a mechanism for implementations as well, because at the moment we don't really constrain the output at all. So the output could be anything you could imagine, really. Like it could be CSV, it could be structured, but it could be structured in different ways. Like it could be a Spark dataset or a Parquet file that uses arrays and structs, or it could be like JSON text in the column. It could be a whole range of different things. And I suppose we probably don't want to constrain that further in the spec, but implementations may want to describe what they've done, so this is what you can expect if you run the view through this implementation. We're going to, use array for collections. We're going to use structs for, complex elements, etc., etc. Yeah.
How would the profile document that, I guess is my question. Are you suggest if that's what you're suggesting?
I think it would really just be similar to the way we've documented the view definition, like we really just describe the semantics of it as part of the profile. We can't really do these things as sort of enforceable, validatable sort of constraints in FHIR. It's really just sort of an extra layer of specification that you've opted in to through sort of declaring it as part of your view definition, I guess.
Right. And just so for my understanding, what you're thinking, like the profile would essentially be like a narrative, like if you like a text block, and it would say like, this implementation, or this implementation running this view definition is going to output X, Y, and Z. Am I getting the right your thought correctly.
Yeah, I guess if you want to use the output for certain types of things, you may need additional capabilities or description around what's coming out. And that's potentially described in a profile is about as far as I've thought about it. And that could go to, yeah, the structure of the output. But I feel like it could also go to other things. Like, I guess if you want to, for example, pick up the output and integrate it with some other software solution, there may be some requirements for that that you might want to describe. So maybe this is a really generic capability, and maybe we have some sort of one or two basic ones in the spec, but then it's also sort of a way of extending the description of what you're building as a view runner. But I'm kind of thinking about this on the fly. So
Yeah, not to put you on the spot. I just trying to understand, what you had in your mind. And, I don't think I'm not making any judgment on the idea, certainly just trying to understand how people might want to use a profile. And if it's essentially to the spec and add constraints that are not enforced, or, that seems totally logical as well. So I don't even know if that's something we would need to add into the spec, but the idea that we might have one or two examples for use cases that we think will be relevant in the short term, that seems like an actionable item for us, to me.
Yeah, so I mean, I
Right.
could see like a couple like right out of the box of that. One would be just a shareable profile that where we require like there's a URL and a table name and a few other things, and so like right out of the box that would provide an example of a profile that I think would be nice to have, and then maybe a second one would be just a tabular data profile that just enforces everything is a table of scalar values, and that profile may be just entirely empty. But we know that a view definition conforms to it because the view definition declares conformance to that profile. And so you can look at your view definition, you can see, oh, this is right in the list. You see this is shareable, this is tabular data, like next to each other, and kind of gives you an idea and describes the intent. And then if we add new stuff later or new stuff externally, it's nice and extensible, just like any other profile.
yeah,
Yep,
I think we really need to tie it to use cases. So I mean, the use cases that I can think of and care about the most, obviously, are like, we've got sort of ephemeral execution of a really minimal sort of view definition into something like Spark, or maybe you're using it to create a table in BigQuery or something like that. So that's kind of one use case. And then the other use case that we've sort of had our eye on but haven't really gotten into yet is we want to take this view definition and make it shareable, and we want to like distribute it within an IG, for example. We want to be able to go to a server and say, give me a bulk extract using this view definition and give it to me as like ND-JSON or Parquet. So like for me, like those are the two sort of really concrete categories of use cases, but I am aware that there's also other use cases. So I feel like we really want to think about this in the context of one of those, or one that still needs to be described. And perhaps we do need to actually put a bit of more work into describing some of these use cases, just especially now that we're starting to think about new features and that sort of thing, so that we have something to pin things to as we're working them up.
Yeah, certainly. I think going at it from, sort of flights of fancy, but tying it to those use cases, I think is a good idea. I think at this point we can potentially list the ones like you did that are the most likely, that we've discussed a couple of times, and there's sort of general agreement that something like, like a CSV mode, like all scalars, and that, to me, this feels like V1.1, right? Or, any changes to the spec feels like V1.1, but you guys put out your own opinions on that as well.
Good. Yeah, I agree. There's a good chance this is not in 1.0.
Awesome.
And then I guess maybe if we had to pick like one use case, what would we start with? What's is it the ephemeral short-lived view use case or something like that? I mean, it'd be nice to talk through one in more depth.
Well, the other one that we have talked about a fair bit is like the transformation, like the OMOP transformation, which I feel is like a specialization of that in a way. But it is also interesting in that there might be some complex requirements related to it, like special implementations of get resource key and all this sort of thing. So, we could perhaps use that as an even more concrete manifestation of the use case where we take a simple view definition and use it for transformation, unless the OMOP transformation actually becomes some sort of shareable set of intermediate views. Like, I guess it depends on how we actually design that thing. And there might be multiple, or there probably will be multiple different ways of doing that transformation, for example. But yeah, I mean, I think it is a good example, and it's a good challenge for us to be able to use this for something real and that's non-trivial.
Yeah, it's not obvious to me how much the profiles would play into the. I mean, feels like OMOP would be a set of view definitions and perhaps some new capabilities, and I guess there's some profiles would play a role there in terms of adding constraints. Like that, I don't know. I'd be inclined to start with like a more common use case for an intent. So maybe if it's shareable or ephemeral or something like that, and then we can build on top of that. Would that make sense?
Yeah, I think maybe one of the more foundational use cases might make sense, but definitely the OMOP use case is going to be a really interesting discussion. So I will let's get everybody to get together for that OMOP conversation. So hopefully everybody voted on the poll. That'll be great. I actually have to leave right now, but you guys want to continue. So, all right, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess I can take the to-do to kind of maybe write up, start the discussion in the Zulip, and maybe I'll start with like the shareable use case. I think is pretty easy to understand, and using profiles for that. And then maybe one other use case that's just purely like a label, like an ephemeral view. I don't know, come up with something, and kind of work through some of the implications there. I mean, we'll probably need to add some stuff. I mean, since the logical model right now, it doesn't have the meta field that exists on other FHIR resources, so there's some minutia to navigate there. But I mean, I feel like I need to write some stuff down, or stuff's going to start falling on my working memory in this space.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we can and should add to the spec is like these sort of profiles of behavior. So we've currently got a runner, but I feel like we need to describe within the spec and split that out. So we could have a runner, we could have a validator, and we can also have like things that I haven't figured out a good name for yet, like the schema inference of the view definition, and even just as basic as can you run this view definition. So like I feel like there's like sort of multiple potential different operations there that come short of executing the full definition. So for example, you might want to say, here's this view definition, give me a description of, and it might be implementation specific, the schema that this needs to land in, so that I can go and create a table for it for where it can live. Or maybe I just want you to tell me whether the view definition is valid, or whether it's runnable, or whether I support the execution of it, etc. So I feel like we could add additional guidance into the spec and sort of like roles that you can either implement or otherwise.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot. I don't know. I'm not sure I tracked on all those use cases there.
Yeah, and the other thing that we still haven't really thought about is like how this all binds into the server. Or what are the potential bindings into the server? Are there operations that we want to define around view definitions? Like, can you, like the one that I can think of is like effectively of a bulk operation, but you also might want to validate one. Maybe you just want to write it into the server, and the server create a materialized view, which is not really standard, but like it's a potential thing. And are there any other sort of server operations that we would want to define around this if it was promoted to being a resource?
Yeah, those are all great topics. Yeah, I think that I don't know. It's like, yeah, I think we probably should get into every one of these. I'm worried that I don't want to bite off too much at once. Is my concern in all these threads.
One of the things I was thinking, as I was looking through the spec early on, I was trying to kind of figure out is the thought behind it that I could see it being used, for example, with ETL. that you would say, hey, I have these FHIR resources and I want to manifest them into a database. I'm going to use the view definition as a mapping layer. Maybe that could be one use case. But then I also saw another aspect of it as a way to describe on something like BigQuery, to say this is the table, and then something else that's going to try, like SQL, for example, running against something like this. Now we have a translation between what would be a FHIR path and what is its manifestation in a flat table, and then kind of use that not as data loader, but as like a runtime translation. So in other words, like now I can run SQL against it. And so you'd be running SQL and SQL. And maybe in that case, in BigQuery, you might manifest it as a view, and it's just kind of a transformation of something else that's underlying it. So when I was thinking of it, I thought of it as these two use cases, but I'm not sure which one is the most canonical.
Yeah, I don't know if we even need to declare which one's the most. I think the intention is to support both of those modalities and allow implementations to use whichever one best fits their needs for their infrastructure, for their pipeline, and and of course the trade-offs. All the using exactly the same trade-offs you might when you're deciding between a view, a logical view, or a materialized view, and an ETL pipeline. I mean, people should be able to use this content either one, and so if your system benefits from an ETL pipeline, use it there. I definitely think we want to support both. In fact, we have like different implementations are kind of at different points along that spectrum already, and so I do think that I think that we're intentionally trying to not be opinionated on which one of those and to support both as well. That said, that perspective could probably be made more explicit in the spec itself and clarified there.
So just to give you like a context of what we do, Angelo, like very, very related to your comment. So my vision is that the view can becomes like the interface for like the ETL. So meaning that whether you are exporting to BigQuery or like Parquet and Spark or Postgres, so that becomes like an implementation detail, and then the downstream queries are written against the flat view. And then, whether underlying it's actually against like a materialized view, or it goes through like a transformation to like a non-materialized view to run on top of, like, let's say Spark with the full FHIR schema, or that becomes like an implementation detail.
Yeah, but I feel like, so this is kind of what I was talking about with the schema inference side of things, right? So for both of those things that you described, Angelo and Bashir, I think you would like to be able to know what the schema is that comes out of this view definition so that you can build on top of it with other queries, or maybe even have another sort of FHIR path-based sort of execution on top of that. In fact, we're doing the same thing in Pathling. So we're actually re-architecting it to use view definitions as the primitive object, but then we've got value-added queries on top of that, like aggregate, for example, which actually under the hood are creating view definitions sort of at this lower level, but then effectively running sort of FHIR path, another layer of FHIR path-based queries on top of that, which is invisible to the user, but it's sort of, using FHIR path to query sort of a schema that's been created by the first layer, which is totally fine in FHIR path actually, but you do need to be able to sort of infer that schema from the view definition. So that's why I'm wondering whether we need a way of sort of guess it through our particular sort of FHIR path implementation or whatever. I think maybe that just needs to be tightened up a little bit, and that would help. That would perhaps ease the implementation of the following layer where you build the queries or whatever from the outputs of the view definition. But I think I have a job to sort of make this more concrete and create a straw man of what this might look like to progress it.
Yeah, I guess, we are at time, but I think like a schema inference is, makes total sense. And I was thinking that, maybe that can become like a job of validator, maybe. Like, you feed the view definition into the validator, and as one of the side effects is that it gives you the schema, like the SQL schema, basically. But yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
All right, folks,
I think we are at time.
Yeah, cool.
Have a good
meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.